The silence after the gavel hit was louder than anything I had ever heard in that courtroom. Not the crack of wood on wood, not the murmur that rippled through the gallery. The silence that followed, that was the thing. It pressed against my ears like water, and I sat there in the second row, my hands folded in my lap so no one could see them shaking, and I thought, 29 years. It took 29 years for the truth to catch up with them. Let me start from the beginning, because if I don't, none of it makes sense. I was 7 years old the first time my stepmother told me I was a burden. She didn't say it with those exact words. She was too careful for that, at least back then. What she said was, "Your father works very hard so that you can eat at this table." She said it the way someone might say it to a child who is misbehaving. I wasn't misbehaving. I was asking if I could have seconds of mashed potatoes. My stepbrother Theo, her son, had already taken thirds. Nobody said anything to Theo. My father sat at the head of the table and looked at his plate. That was the pattern. That was always the pattern. My name is Willa. I am 29 years old. For the past 4 years, I have been a licensed court interpreter working with the federal judiciary in Chicago, which means I have sat in a lot of rooms and listened to a lot of things that made my stomach turn. I have learned to keep my face still. I have learned to breathe through it. But nothing, not a single case I have ever interpreted for, not a single moment in that sterile fluorescent lit chamber, prepared me for the day I sat in courtroom 14B and interpreted the testimony that brought my own family to its knees. I need you to understand what kind of family I'm talking about. My mother died when I was 4. Pancreatic cancer, fast and merciless. I don't have many real memories of her, just fragments. The smell of her shampoo, the way she hummed when she was doing dishes, a yellow scarf she wore on cold days. My father remarried when I was 6. He said he needed help. He said it was practical. He said my stepmother was a good woman who would take care of both of us. She took care of him. I was not included in that arrangement. I don't want to waste your time cataloging every small cruelty. There were so many that they blur together. The birthday parties I wasn't invited to because it's the school kids from Theo's class and we only have so much space. The college fund that apparently existed for Theo but not for me. A fact I discovered not from my father but from a stray comment my stepmother made at Thanksgiving dinner when I was 17. The kind of comment designed to land like a blade and then be denied. "Oh, I assumed your father had told you. I'm sure he has something set aside for you somewhere." He didn't. I worked 3 jobs through college. I paid my own way. I graduated with honors from the University of Illinois with a degree in linguistics and a minor in Spanish. My father came to the graduation. He took one photo and left early because my stepmother had a headache. I'm not telling you this because I want pity. I'm telling you because you need to understand why I kept going back, why I kept calling, why every Christmas I drove 2 hours to that house in Naperville and sat at that table and smiled and said, "Thank you," when my stepmother handed me a gift that was always a candle or a loaf of bread or something she had clearly grabbed from a gift bag she'd received from someone else. Why I transferred money to my father's account 3 times over the years when things were tight. Why I kept trying. Because he was my father. Because some part of me, some stupid, persistent 7-year-old part of me, believed that if I was good enough, patient enough, useful enough, he would eventually look at me across a table and see me. Really see me. He never did. But I kept trying anyway. I got the interpreter job 4 years ago. It was the best thing that had ever happened to me. The federal courthouse became the place where I finally felt like I was good at something that mattered. Where what I did had consequences that rippled outward into the world. My supervisor, a methodical woman named Priscilla, who wore the same 3 blazers in rotation and kept candy on her desk for the junior staff, told me in my first performance review that I had exceptional composure under pressure. I kept that phrase in my head for years. I took it out whenever I needed it. About 18 months ago, I was assigned to a civil racketeering case. I can't tell you the details of that case. There are things still under seal, but what I can tell you is that the case involved a real estate investment scheme, a network of shell companies, and a series of wire transfers that the FBI had been tracing for almost 2 years. It was a complex case, multi-defendant, a lot of documents in multiple languages, which is why they needed me. I need you to understand what happened next, and I need you to understand that I did not see it coming. Not at first. About 6 weeks into the case, I was reviewing a batch of translated financial documents. It was late. The building was mostly empty. I had a cup of coffee going cold on my desk and a highlighter in my hand, and I was moving through column after column of transaction records the way you do when you've been doing this long enough that your eyes start to skim rather than read. And then I stopped. There was an account number I recognized. It took me a moment to place it. You know how sometimes your brain knows something before the conscious part catches up? I sat there staring at that number and felt a cold, slow thing move through my chest. Then I opened my phone. I went to the banking app where I had sent my father money, the 3 times I had done it, the times I had transferred funds because things were tight. I checked the account number I had sent those transfers to. It matched. I want to be very precise about what I did next, because I know how this sounds and I want you to understand that I did not do anything rash. I did not pick up the phone and call my father. I did not send a message. I sat very still at my desk for approximately 7 minutes. Then I went to Priscilla's office, knocked on her door, and told her I had a potential conflict of interest to disclose. What I had found, what I had stumbled into, was the edge of something much larger than I understood. My father's account had received funds from one of the shell companies at the center of the investigation, which meant my father was connected, somehow, to the network the FBI was unraveling, which meant that the money I had transferred to him over the years, money I had scraped together from my own salary, from my own savings, because he had called me and said things were hard, some of that money had moved through an account that federal investigators were already looking at. Priscilla pulled me from the case that same night. Conflict of interest was now a documented reality. She was kind about it. She brought me a cup of coffee and told me I had done the right thing. The FBI had questions for me. Of course they did. I answered all of them. I sat in a room with a federal agent named, I'll just call her the agent, and I told her everything I knew, the transfers, the dates, the amounts. The phone calls my father had made asking for money, always framed the same way. Things were tight. The investment hadn't come through yet. It would only be for a few months. I told her about my stepmother. I told her about Theo. That last part surprised even me, as it was coming out of my mouth. But the agent had asked whether anyone else in the family had any contact with the financial matters, and I remembered something. A conversation at Christmas 2 years ago. My stepmother pulling my father into the kitchen, their voices low and sharp. Theo on his phone in the corner, typing something. The way they'd all gone quiet when I walked in. I had thought nothing of it at the time. I had spent my whole life being excluded from their conversations. I was used to rooms going silent when I entered. But now I turned that memory over and over in my hands like a stone, and it looked different in this new light. I don't know exactly what the investigation found after I made my disclosure. The agent couldn't tell me much, and I had been removed from the case entirely. For 3 months, I went about my work, interpreted other cases, went home to my apartment, called my friend Greta on Sundays the way I always did. I did not call my father. I told myself this was protocol, that I shouldn't reach out while there was an active investigation, that I was doing the right thing by staying away. And those things were true. But the other thing that was also true, the thing I had to sit with in the quiet of my apartment at night, was that I was relieved. I was relieved to have an official reason not to call. He called me instead, in early November. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. His voice sounded the same as always. Measured, a little distant, the voice of a man who had spent 30 years carefully not saying the things that needed to be said. He said he hadn't heard from me in a while. He said he hoped I was well. He said my stepmother was asking about Thanksgiving. I did not call back. The indictments came down on a Tuesday. I found out from Greta, who had seen it on the local news before I had. She called me saying, Willa, there's something on the news, your last name, I think you need to. And I was already pulling it up on my laptop. My father, my stepmother, Theo. All 3 of them, named in a federal indictment related to the same racketeering case I had been pulled from months earlier. I sat on my kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor and not the couch or a chair. I just ended up there, back against the cabinets, laptop on my knees, reading the same paragraph over and over. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction, the names of shell companies I had never heard of but that had apparently been operated in part through accounts connected to my family's finances for the better part of a decade. I had spent years driving to Naperville at Christmas with a bottle of wine. I had spent years sitting at that table and being made to feel like a guest in my own family home. I had spent years wiring money to my father because he said things were tight. All of that time, all of those years, my stepmother had known. Theo had known. My father had known. They were not struggling. They were laundering money through a network of fraudulent investment companies, and the only person in that family who had no idea was the one they'd spent 30 years treating like she didn't belong. I'm not going to pretend the next few months were easy. They weren't. I went to therapy twice a week. I cried in the parking lot of my office building one afternoon and had to sit there for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside. I called Greta at 11 o'clock at night once and just said, I don't know what's real. And she said, I know, and stayed on the phone with me for 2 hours while we watched the same documentary on our separate televisions like we used to do in college. The case went to trial in the spring. There was a moment during the pre-trial filings when the defense attorneys, and each defendant had their own, floated the idea that I had somehow been complicit, that the transfers I made to my father's account were evidence of my involvement, that I had known. It was desperate and stupid, and it didn't go anywhere, but I want you to know it happened, because that was the moment something shifted in me. Something that had been coiled tight for a long time, some sad hoping thing that had been waiting for my father to acknowledge what he'd done, to call me and say I'm sorry, to give me some version of the recognition I had been waiting for since I was 7 years old. That thing finally let go. I wasn't waiting anymore. I was called to testify, not as a defendant, as a witness. I walked into that courtroom in a navy blazer I had bought specifically for this, and I sat in the witness chair, and I looked straight ahead and I told the truth. Every word of it. The transfers, the voicemails, the Christmas dinners, the way my father had called me when things were tight. I did not look at him while I spoke. I was not trying to hurt him. I was just telling the truth, finally, to people who were required by law to listen. At one point during my testimony, my stepmother's attorney objected to a line of questioning, and in the commotion, I heard my stepmother say something to the woman sitting next to her. I have excellent hearing, it's part of the job, and I heard her clearly. She said, "She always was a problem." I kept my face still. I had a lot of practice. The jury came back after 4 days, guilty on all counts, all 3 of them. I was sitting in the gallery for the verdict, not as a witness this time, just as a person who had a right to be there. Priscilla had offered to come with me, and I had said no, I wanted to do it alone. The courtroom was quiet in that particular way courtrooms get when something is about to happen, when everyone has been waiting and the waiting is almost over. The 4 persons stood up, read the verdict, and then the gavel came down and it was done. I didn't cry. I had expected to cry, had sort of braced for it the way you brace for cold water, but it didn't come. What came instead was that silence, that strange heavy silence that pressed against my ears. And underneath it, something else. Something I didn't have a word for in English, though I know the word in 3 other languages, that specific feeling of a thing that has been wrong for a very long time finally, at last, being corrected. My father looked over at me from the defense table. I don't know if he was looking for something, forgiveness maybe, or just acknowledgement, or maybe just to confirm that I was really there. I held his gaze for a moment, and then I looked away. Not out of cruelty. I want you to understand that. I looked away because I had already said everything there was to say, under oath in front of a federal judge, and there was nothing left. Outside on the courthouse steps, the wind was cold, and the sky had that particular flat gray color that Chicago gets in April. I buttoned my coat. I put my earbuds in. I stood there for a minute, just breathing. Then I called Greta. She picked up on the first ring. She didn't say anything. She just waited. "It's done," I said. She exhaled. Then she said, "What do you want to do?" I thought about it. I thought about the 7-year-old girl who had asked for seconds of mashed potatoes and been told her father worked very hard so she could eat at that table. I thought about the graduation photo and the wire transfers and the Christmas candles and the voicemail I had never returned. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to be good enough for people who were never going to see me clearly, no matter what I did. "I want to get breakfast," I said, "somewhere with really good eggs, and I don't want to talk about any of it for at least 2 hours. Greta laughed. She said she knew a place. I walked down the courthouse steps alone in my navy blazer in the cold April wind, and I thought, some families are made from blood and some are made from choice. The one I was born into had already told me, 100 times in 100 small ways, that I didn't belong to them. I had just spent 29 years refusing to believe it. I believed it now, and for the first time in as long as I could remember, it felt like freedom.